Good evening, everyone. We've got a few people here in person, a few on Zoom, and more, I imagine, on Facebook and YouTube. So, my name's Jamyang. I'll be teaching from the Jatakamala tonight, and then another couple more sessions before the end of the year. So, of course, we begin by, very importantly, setting the correct motivation, an altruistic motivation to be listening in. It's very good that we've put aside the time to be able to be receptive to these readings, which are very useful for us if we have the right intention. So we have to generate refuge and bodhicitta. Refuge because we are dedicating this to being a place where of not just refuge in the sense of protection, but also just in terms of being safe, feeling safe around the teachings and how they can help us to open our minds about spiritual ideas such as rebirth. These are the stories of the Buddha's past lives, and we have to look at these stories with not so much a critical eye, but a receptive heart, and look at them to see what type of story is it telling to us. What is it telling us about our own stories? Do we really believe in rebirth? I'm sure we all have an instinctual belief. I think just about anyone has, many people have some sort of instinctive belief about the possibility of rebirth, or particularly about karma, that what goes around comes around, this type of thing. But how convinced are we of this? And why did the Buddha teach like this? So we have to develop that kind of environment in a Dharma center such as this, or if you're listening at home, I'm sure you've reserved such a space in your study or office or whatever it may be, so that just like a library is good for people to sit down and read books and newspapers and magazines, just as the theatre is a good place to go to watch some drama and entertainment, just as we put our lounge room aside to watch TV and so forth. So in a sacred space like this, where with teachings, we're not just teaching intellectually or on an academic level, but we're teaching after the particular prayers about refuge and bodhicitta, which basically means safety and altruism. So we're doing this not out of gaining knowledge in an arrogant way. We remember that any knowledge we gain, we also use that, say that we're, to use the analogy of quenching our thirst of spiritual knowledge, with the water of spiritual knowledge, we're also using water to wash away any dirt of arrogance, of having knowledge, as they would say in the traditional way of thinking. So we generate refuge and bodhicitta, and then we generate the four immeasurables, which is a pan-religious idea of wishing all of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and impartiality or equanimity. So I'm not sure how to screen share, but I think you may know these prayers as it is. If not, just
We can't hear you, Jamyang.
Oh no, sorry.
That's all right.
Thanks for letting me know.
It's all right.
Should I start again? Gosh, I've just been talking for 5 minutes and I didn't know I had my microphone.
No, yeah, all good. I could hear you when you were talking. When you start doing the prayers, it just it somehow,
awesome.
Yeah.
I might have pressed the button by accident.
Yeah, you probably muted yourself by accident. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All good, yeah.
In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to add obedience. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to add obedience. In the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, I take refuge till enlightenment. By virtue of listening and the like, may I reach Buddhahood to aid all beings. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. According to the intelligence and predisposition of all beings, we ask that you turn the Dharma wheel of great, low, and common vehicles. Yeah, so as I was saying, we need to apply our intellect, I think, but not in the way that we might first think. Not so much in doubting the teachings or doubting if, the relevance and that type of thing. But to use the analogy, there's a story of a Buddha walking with one of his monks in the forest. And the attendant asked the Buddha about why he was teaching something or other. I haven't seen this story in quite some time, but I was reminded of it in preparation for this lesson tonight. And the Buddha knelt over and bent down and picked up a pile of leaves. And he said, "O Venerable, what is greater, the amount of leaves I'm holding in my hand now, or the amount of leaves in the whole forest?" And of course his attendant said, "O Venerable, it's obvious that the leaves in the whole forest are far greater than those that you hold in your hand." And the Buddha said, "Likewise, the things that I know upon attaining enlightenment or awakening are far vaster than what I have taught. And what I have taught is just like the few leaves that I hold in the palm of my hand." So that analogy, we are told that the Buddha taught for 45 years, which sounds reasonable. He gained enlightenment at 35, and he died either at 80 or 85, I'm not sure. I think it might have been about 80. So he had a good career teaching. And the teachings, at least the ones I'm teaching, the Jataka is found both in the Pali and the Sanskrit. The one I'm reading from that I started last week is from the Pali Tipitaka, which I have at home. And this is one of the volumes that was translated by the Pali Text Society in London in late 19th century. So I've actually read through this myself, but I've found that even just going through it last week, reading it out aloud and trying to add a bit of commentary to make sense, I found that it left a far deeper impression on me than simply reading by myself. For example, one of the few stories we went through last week mentioned how someone had a grudge against someone else, and then at the end of the story it says, this is the first instance where Devadatta brought about having a grudge with the Buddha. So that was quite interesting. So we call this the Jatakamala. Ja means to be born. It's a Sanskrit verb, ja or jan. Jata comes from that, and then Jataka means that which is born. So we say birth. So it's like saying birth stories or the former lives, former births. And then the mala, as we know, a mala is these ones, the beads on the string, the prayer beads, like a rosary or a garland of beads. And I think there's an amazing analogy of as a metaphor for rebirth, as a garland. Each bead is a distinct birth, a distinct life, but there's some sort of continuity between them, which is what we call the thread, isn't it? So it's held together. This is found in the Buddhist language. If you do some study of the traditional language, of the traditional canonical technical languages, Sanskrit and Tibetan, you find. I'm sure that some of the philosophical texts go into more detail as to explaining rebirth, but as for actual terms itself, I've worked out that the Sanskrit term for it is samtana, S-A-M-T-A-N-A, samtana, which literally means continuity. So there's some sort of continuity that connects us from hour to hour, from day to day, from year to year, and from life to life. So this is what we call a mind stream in Tibetan Buddhism. Please bless my mind stream. It's not too different from the idea of a soul, but when we talk about a soul, then we talk about permanence, and then we get into a whole lot of existential trouble, I guess. So continuum is a very safe way of putting it. Now it's said, one of my teachers has told me, and I'm not sure if this is always applicable, but it is said, at least with some texts, that the most intelligent students can understand the importance and the relevance of the text simply by hearing its title. So in this case, Jatakamala, the Garland of Births. So, and like I describe, it's an amazing analogy, maybe amazing illustration. So I'm not sure if that's the case in this particular text, but I'm sure we can imagine that the people who surrounded Buddha during his lifetime must have respected him as a very authoritative figure from the way he taught, and I'm sure they would have understood these past life stories quite well, and been quite amazed by the way in which the Buddha could have taught them with such authority and confidence, saying that this really happened in a past life, and this was this person, and this was me, and so forth. So with that in mind, we got up to number 4 last time. I've just started reading from the very start of this, and what I did was I read through the introduction of the 5th past life story called the Tandulanali Jataka. Sorry, no, I'm jumping ahead. Number 4, called the Chulaka Seti Jataka, whereby a young man picks up a dead mouse which he sells and works up this capital till he becomes rich. So now I'll go on to read the actual story. Once on a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, that's Varanasi, in Kasi, the Bodhisattva was born into the treasurer's family, and growing up was made treasurer, being called Treasurer Little, or Junior. A wise and clever man was he, with a keen eye for signs and omens. One day on his way to wait upon the king, he came on a dead mouse lying on the road, and, taking note of the position of the stars at that moment, said, "Any decent young fellow with his wits about him has only to pick that mouse up, and he might start a business and keep a wife." His words were overheard by a young man of good family, but reduced circumstances, who said to himself, "That's a man who has always got a reason for what he says." And accordingly he picked up the mouse, which he sold for a farthing at a tavern for the cat. With the farthing he got molasses and took drinking water in a water pot. Coming on flower gatherers, returning from the forest, he gave each a tiny quantity of the molasses and ladled the water out to them. Each of them gave him a handful of flowers, with the proceeds of which, next day, he came back again to the flower grounds provided with more molasses and a pot of water. That day the flower gatherers, before they went, gave him flowering plants with half the flowers left on them, and thus in a little while he obtained 8 pennies. Later, one rainy and windy day, the wind blew down a quantity of rotten branches and boughs and leaves in the king's pleasaunce, and the gardener did not see how to clear them away. Then up came the young man with an offer to remove the lot, if the wood and leaves might be his. The gardener closed with the offer on the spot. Then this apt pupil of Treasurer Little repaired to the children's playground, and in a very little while had got them by bribes of molasses to collect every stick and leaf in the place into a heap at the entrance of the pleasaunce. I think pleasaunce must mean like a park or something like that. Just then the king's potter was on the lookout for fuel to fire balls for the palace, and coming on this heap he took the lot off his hands. The sale of his wood brought in 16 pennies to this pupil of Treasurer Little, as well as 5 bowls and other vessels. Having now 24 pennies in all, a plan occurred to him. He went to the vicinity of the city gate with a jar full of water and supplied 500 mowers with water to drink. Said they, "You've done us a good turn, friend. What can we do for you?" "Oh, I'll tell you when I want your aid," said he, and as he went about, he struck up an intimacy with a land trader and a sea trader. Said the former to him, "Tomorrow there will come to town a horse dealer with 500 horses to sell." On hearing this piece of news, he said to the mowers, "I want each of you today to give me a bundle of grass and not to sell your own grass till mine is sold." "Certainly," said they, and delivered the 500 bundles of grass at his house. Unable to get grass for his horses elsewhere, the dealer purchased our friend's grass for 1,000 pieces. Only a few days later, his sea trading friend brought him news of the arrival of a large ship in port, and another plan struck him. He hired for 8 pence a well-appointed carriage which plied for hire by the hour, and went in great style down to the port. Having bought the ship on credit and deposited his signet ring as security, he had a pavilion pitched hard by, and said to his people as soon as he took his seat inside, "When merchants are being shown in, let them be passed on by 3 successive ushers into my presence." Hearing that a ship had arrived in port, about 100 merchants came down to buy the cargo, only to be told that they could not have it, as a great merchant had already made a payment on the account. So away they all went to the young man, and the footmen duly announced them by 3 successive ushers, as had been arranged beforehand. Each man of the 100 severally gave him 1,000 pieces to buy a share in the ship, and then a further 1,000 each to buy him out altogether. So it was with 200,000 pieces that this pupil of Treasurer Little returned to Benares. Actuated by a desire to show his gratitude, he went with 100,000 pieces to call on Treasurer Little. "How did you come by all this wealth?" asked the treasurer. "In 4 short months, simply by following your advice," replied the young man, and he told him the whole story, starting with the dead mouse. Thought Lord High Treasurer Little, on hearing all this, "I must see that a young fellow of these parts does not fall into anybody else's hands." So he married him to his own grown-up daughter, and settled all the family estates on the young man. And at the treasurer's death, he became treasurer in that city, and the Bodhisattva passed away to fare according to his deserts. So that concludes the story. His lesson ended. The Supreme Buddha, the all-knowing one himself, repeated this stanza. "With humblest start and trifling capital, a shrewd and able man will rise to wealth, even as his breath can nurse a tiny flame." Also the Blessed One said, "It is through me, brethren, that little Wayman has just now risen to great things in the faith, as in times past to great things in the way of wealth." So here he's connecting, like I mentioned last week, the Buddha is connecting the idea of worldly wisdom and transcendental wisdom. So the worldly wisdom is that experienced in this fable from a past life, and then the transcendental wisdom is the progress made on the actual spiritual path in this life. His lesson thus finished, the master made the connection between the two stories he had told and identified the birth in these concluding words. Little Wayman was in those days the pupil of Treasurer Little, and I myself, Lord High Treasurer Little. So that's the end of story number 4. So story number 5 is called Tandulanali Jataka, which is summarized in the following. An incompetent valuer declares 500 horses worth a measure of rice, which measure of rice in turn he is led to declare worth all Benares. So Benares is the name that the British gave to Varanasi. Excuse me. Tandulanali Jataka. Dost ask how much a peck of rice is worth? This was told by the master whilst at Jetavana about the elder Udayi, called the Dullard. At that time, the Reverend Dubba, the Malian, was mancipal, not sure what that word means, to the brotherhood, the Sangha. When in the early morning Dubba was allocating the checks for rice, sometimes it was choice rice and sometimes it was an inferior quality, which fell to the share of the elder Udayi. On days when he received the inferior quality, he used to make a commotion in the check room by demanding, "Is Dubba the only one who knows how to give out checks? Don't we know?" One day when he was making a commotion, they handed him the check basket, saying, "Here, you give the checks out yourself today." Thenceforth it was Udayi who gave out the checks to the brotherhood. But in his distribution, he could not tell the best from the inferior rice, nor did he know what seniority was entitled to the best rice and what to the inferior. So too, when he was making out the roster, he had not an idea of the seniority of the brethren thereon. Consequently, when the brethren took up their places, he made a mark on the ground or on the wall to show that one detachment stood here and another there. Next day there were fewer brethren of one grade and more of another in the check room. Where there were fewer, the mark was too low down. Where the number was greater, it was too high up. But Udayi, quite ignorant of detachments, gave out the checks simply according to his old marks. Hence the brethren said to him, "Friend Udayi, the mark is too high up or too low down. The best rice is for those of such and such seniority, and the inferior quality for such and such others." But he put them back with the argument, "If this mark is where it is, what are you standing here for? Why am I to trust you? It's my mark I trust." Then the boys and novices thrust him from the check room, crying, "Friend Udayi the Dullard, when you give out the checks, the brethren are docked of what they ought to get. You're not fit to give them out. Get you gone from here." Henceforth a great uproar arose in the check room. Hearing the noise, the master asked the elder Ananda, saying, "Ananda, there is a great uproar in the check room. What is this noise about?" The elder explained it all to the Buddha. "Ananda," said he, "this is not the only time when Udayi, by his stupidity, has robbed others of their profit. He did just the same thing in bygone times too." The elder asked the Blessed One for an explanation, and the Blessed One made clear what had been concealed by rebirth. Concealed by rebirth meaning Most of our previous lives are concealed to us by the shock of us being reborn, as I mentioned last week. So we begin the story. Once on a time, Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, Varanasi, in Kasi. In those days, our Bodhisattva was his valuer. He used to value horses, elephants and the like, and jewels, gold and the like, and he used to pay over to the owners of the goods the proper price, as he fixed it. But the king was greedy, and his greed suggested to him this thought: this valuer with his style of valuing will soon exhaust all the riches in my house. I must get another valuer. Opening his window and looking out into his courtyard, he espied walking across a stupid, greedy hind, in whom he saw a likely candidate for the post. So the king had the man sent for, and asked him whether he could do the work. "Oh yes," said the man. And so, to safeguard the royal treasure, this stupid fellow was appointed valuer. After this, the fool, in valuing elephants and horses and the like, used to fix a price dictated by his own fancy, neglecting their true worth. But as he was valuer, the price was what he said and no other. At that time there arrived from the north country a horse dealer with 500 horses. The king sent for his new valuer and bade him value the horses. And the price he set on the whole 500 horses was just 1 measure of rice, which he ordered to be paid over to the dealer, directing the horses to be led off to the stable. Away went the horse dealer to the old valuer, to whom he told what had happened, and asked him what was to be done. "Give him a bribe," said the ex-valuer, "and put this point to him. Knowing as we do that our horses are just worth a single measure of rice, we are curious to learn from you what the precise value of a measure of rice is. Could you state its value in the king's presence? If he says he can, then take him before the king, and I too will be there." Readily following the Bodhisattva's advice, the horse dealer bribed the man and put the question to him. The other, having expressed his ability to value a measure of rice, was promptly taken to the palace, whither also went the Bodhisattva and many other ministers. With due obeisance, the horse dealer said, "Sire, I do not dispute that the price of 500 horses is a single measure of rice, but I would ask your majesty to question your valuer as to the value of that measure of rice." Ignorant of what had passed, the king said to the fellow, "Valuer, what are 500 horses worth?" "A measure of rice, sire," was the reply. "Very good, my friend. If 500 horses are worth 1 measure of rice, what is that measure of rice worth?" "It is worth all Benares and its suburbs," was the fool's reply. Thus we learn that, having first valued the horses at a measure of hill paddy to please the king, he was bribed by the horse dealer to estimate that the measure of rice at the worth of all Benares and its suburbs, and that through the walls of Benares were 12 leagues. Leagues is an old fashion of measurement, yojana, round by themselves, while the city and suburbs together were 300 leagues round. Yet the fool priced all this vast city and its suburbs at a single measure of rice. So it's like saying Canberra is worth a bag of rice or something like this. Hereupon the ministers clapped their hands and laughed merrily. "We used to think," they said in scorn, "that the earth and the realm were beyond price. But now we learn that the kingdom of Benares, Varanasi, together with its king, is only worth a single measure of rice. What talents this valuer has! How he has retained his post so long! How has he retained his post so long? But truly the valuer suits our king admirably." Then the Bodhisattva repeated this stanza. "Dost ask how much a peck of rice is worth? Why, all Benares, both within and out. Yet strange to tell, 500 horses too are worth precisely this same peck of rice." Thus put to open shame, the king sent the fool packing and gave the Bodhisattva the office again. And when his life closed, the Bodhisattva passed away to fare according to his deserts. So that's the end of the story. His lesson ended and the two stories told. The master made the connection, linking both together, and identified the birth by saying in conclusion, Udayi, the dullard, was the stupid rustic valuer of those days, and I myself the wise valuer. That's the end of number 5. Number 6 is called Deva Dhamma Jataka, and it's summarized in the contents as: two princes going down to a haunted pool are seized by an ogre. The third, by correctly defining godlike, saves his brothers. Those only godlike call. This story was told by the Blessed One while at Jetavana about her wealthy brother. Tradition tells us that, on the death of his wife, a squire of Savatthi joined the brotherhood. When he was joining, he caused to be built for himself a chamber to live in, a room for the fire and the storeroom, and not till he had stocked his storeroom with ghee, rice and the like did he finally join. Even after he had become a brother, a monk, he used to send for his servants and make them cook him what he liked to eat. He was richly provided with the requisites. The footnote says, i.e. an alms bowl, 3 cloths, which is the lower robe, the vest and the shawl, and the girdle, and a razor, a needle and a water strainer. Those were the things that a monk possessed. Having an entire change of clothing for night and another for day, and he dwelt aloof on the outskirts of the monastery. One day, when he had taken out his cloths and bedding, and had spread them out to dry in his chamber, a number of brethren from the country who were on a pilgrimage from monastery to monastery came in their journeying to his cell and found all these belongings. "Whose are these?" they asked. "Mine, sirs," he replied. "What, sir?" they cried. "This upper cloth and that as well, this undercloth as well as that, and that bedding too, is it all yours?" "Yes, nobody's but mine." "Sir," said they, "the Blessed One has only sanctioned 3 cloths, and yet, though the Buddha, to whose doctrine you have devoted yourself, is so simple in his wants, you forsooth has amassed all this stock of requisites. Come, we must take you before the Lord of Wisdom." And so saying, they went off with him to the master. Being aware of their presence, the master said, "Wherefore is it, brethren, that you have brought the brother against his will?" "Sir, this brother is well off and has quite a stock of requisites." "Is it true, brother, as they say, that you are so well off?" "Yes, Blessed One." "But why, brother, have you amassed these belongings? Do I not extol the virtues of wanting little, contentment and so forth, solitude and determined resolve?" Angered by the master's words, he cried, "Then I'll go about like this." And flinging off his outer clothing, he stood in their midst, clad only in his waistcloth. Then, as a moral support to him, the master said, "Was it not you, brother, who, in bygone days, were a seeker after the shamefacedness that fears to sin, and even when you were a water demon, lived for 12 years seeking after that shamefacedness? How then comes it that, after vowing to follow the weighty doctrine of the Buddha, you have flung off your outer robes and stand here devoid of shame?" At the master's word, his sense of shame was restored. He donned his robes again, and saluting the master, seated himself at the side. The brethren, having asked the Blessed One to explain to them the matter he had mentioned, the Blessed One made clear what had been concealed from them by rebirth. And we begin the story. Once upon a time, Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, Varanasi, in Kasi. The Bodhisattva, having come to birth in those days as the king's son by the queen, was duly named Prince Mahimsasa. Excuse me. By the time he could run about, a second son was born to the king, and the name they gave this child was Prince Moon. But by the time he could run about, the Bodhisattva's mother died. Then the king took another queen, who was his joy and delight, and their love was crowned with the birth of yet another prince, whom they named Prince Sun, S-U-N. In his joy at the birth of the boy, the king promised to grant her any boon she might ask on the child's behalf. Boon is like a favour. But the queen treasured up the promise to be fulfilled at her own good time hereafter. Later, when her son had grown up, she said to the king, "Sire, when my boy was born, you granted me a boon to ask for him. Let him be king." "Nay," said the king, "2 sons have I, radiant as flaming fires. I cannot give the kingdom to your son." But when he saw that, undaunted by this refusal, the king kept plaguing him time after time to grant her request, the king, fearing lest the woman should plot evil against his sons, sent for them and said, "My children, when Prince Sun was born, I granted a boon, and now his mother wants the kingdom for him. I have no wish to give him the kingdom, but she will be plotting evil against you. You had better retire to the forest, to return at my death to rule in the city which belongs by right to our house." So saying, with tears and lamentations, the king kissed his 2 sons on the head and sent them forth. As the princes were leaving the palace after their adieu, means like farewell, to their father, who should see them but Prince Sun himself, who was playing in the courtyard. And no sooner did he learn what was the matter than he made up his mind to go with his brothers. So he too went off in their company. The 3 came to the region of the Himalayas. In Sanskrit that's pronounced Himalaya. Hima means snow and Alaya means range. So Himalaya means the snowy range. We just say Himalayas in English. And here the Bodhisattva, who had turned aside from the road and was sitting at the foot of a tree, said to the Prince Sun, "Run down to the pool yonder, son dear, drink and bathe there, and then bring us some water some water back in a lotus leaf." Now that the pool had been delivered over to a certain water sprite by Vesavana, who said to him, "With the exception of such as know what is truly godlike, all that go down into this pool are yours to devour. Over those that do not enter the waters, you have no power granted to you." And thenceforth the water sprite used to ask all who went down into the pool what was truly godlike, devouring everyone who did not know. Now it was into this pool that Prince Sun went down, quite unsuspiciously, with the result that he was seized by the water sprite, who said to him, "Do you know what is truly godlike?" "Oh yes," said he, "the sun and moon." "You don't know," said the monster, and hauling the prince down into the depths of the water, imprisoned him there in his own abode. Finding that his brother was a long time gone, the Bodhisattva sent Prince Moon. He too was seized by the water sprite and asked whether he knew what was truly godlike. "Oh yes, I know," said he. "The 4 quarters of heaven are." "You don't know," said the water sprite as he hauled the second victim off to the same prison house. Finding that this second brother too tarried long, the Bodhisattva felt sure that something had happened to them. So away he went after them and tracked their footsteps down into the water. Realizing at once that the pool must be the domain of a water sprite, he girded on his sword and took his bow in his hand and waited. Now when the demon found that the Bodhisattva had no intention of entering the water, he assumed the face of a forester, and in this guise addressed the Bodhisattva thus: "You're tired with your journey, mate. Why don't you go in and have a bathe and a drink and deck yourself with lotuses? You would travel on comfortably afterwards." Recognizing him at once for a demon, the Bodhisattva said, "It is you who have seized my brothers." "Yes, it was the reply. "Why?" "Because all who go down into this pool belong to me." "What, all?" Not those who know what is truly godlike. All save these are mine." And do you want to know the godlike?" "I do." If this be so, I will tell you what is truly godlike." "Do so, and I will listen." "I should like to begin," said the Bodhisattva, "but I am travel-stained with my journey." Then the water sprite bathed the Bodhisattva and gave him food to eat and water to drink, decked him with flowers, sprinkled him with scents, and laid out a couch for him in the midst of a gorgeous pavilion. Seating himself on this couch and making the water sprite sit at his feet, the Bodhisattva said, "Listen then, and you shall hear what the truly godlike is." And he repeated this stanza: "Those only godlike call who shrink from sin, the white-souled tranquil votaries of good." And when the demon heard this, he was pleased, and said to the Bodhisattva, "Man of wisdom, I am pleased with you, and give you up one of your brothers. Which one shall I bring?" "The youngest." "Man of wisdom, though you know so well what the truly godlike is, you don't act on your knowledge." "How so?" "Why, you take the younger in preference to the elder, without regard to its seniority." "Demon, I not only know but practice the godlike. It was on this boy's account that we sought refuge in the forest. It was for him that his mother asked the kingdom from our father. And our father, refusing to fulfill her demand, consented to our flight to the refuge of the forest. With us came this boy, nor ever thought of turning back again. Not a soul would believe me if I were to give out that he had been devoured by a demon in the forest. And it is the fear of odium that impels me to mind him at your hands." "Excellent, excellent, O man of wisdom," cried the demon in approval. "You not only know but practice the godlike." And in token of his pleasure and approval, he brought forth the 2 brothers and gave them both back to the Bodhisattva. Then said the latter to the water sprite, "Friend, it is in consequence of your own evil deeds in times past that you have now been born a demon, subsisting on the flesh and blood of other living creatures. And in this present birth too, you are continuing to do evil. This evil conduct will forever bar you from escaping rebirth in hell and the other evil states. Wherefore, from this time forth, renounce evil and live virtuously." Having worked the demon's conversion, the Bodhisattva continued to dwell at that spot under his protection, until one day he read in the stars that his father was dead. Then, taking the water sprite with him, he returned to Benares, Varanasi, and took possession of the kingdom, making Prince Moon his viceroy and Prince Sun his generalissimo. For the water sprite he made a home in a pleasant spot, and took measures to ensure his being provided with the choicest garlands, flowers, and food. He himself ruled in righteousness until he passed away to fare according to his deeds. That concludes the story. His lesson ended. The master preached the truths, at the close whereof that his brother won the fruit of the first path. And the all-knowing Buddha, having told the 2 stories, made the connection linking the 2 together, and identified the birth by saying, The well-to-do brother was the water demon of those days. Ananda was Prince Sun. Sariputta, as we know Shariputra in Sanskrit, was Prince Moon. And I myself, the eldest brother, Prince Mahimsasa. Wow. These stories, at home I'm reading the Mahabharata, the great epic of India, and these stories are very similar as the chapters in there. Except without these pauses of saying who is who in the previous life. But it's also been, by coincidence, translated about the same time, so I'm quite used to this late 19th century language of translation, which if you get used to enough and you get used to this sort of listening and the way it's sort of translated from the classical Pali, it's a very good meditation to do, as I'm sure you're doing as I'm reading. So we'll just keep going. I plan to make these sessions just an hour and a half, so we'll finish up at about 9:15 each evening. So we'll move on to number 7, which is called the Katahari Jataka, and the summary of it is that a king refuses to recognize his son by chance. The mother throws the child into the air, praying that, if he be not the king's son, he may be killed by his fall. The child rests in mid-air, and the king recognizes him as his son. Let's hope that's not too much of a plot spoiler. So number 7, your son am I. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana about the story of Vasabhakatiya, which will be found in the 12th book on the Padasala Jataka, a later one, number 465. Tradition tells us that she was the daughter of Mahanama Saka by a slave girl named Nagamundar. Interesting, in Pali and Sanskrit, if a name ends in a long vowel, like this one, Nagamundar, with a stripe at the end, atop the vowel, that usually, atop of the A, sorry, I'm not sure if it doesn't really apply to other letters so much, but that generally indicates a female, whereas a short A at the end indicates a male. So actually, the deity Tara, the female one, it's actually Tara. Both vowels are long. Tara. If it's Tara, that's actually male name, like Taranata, I should say. So, yeah. Anyway, that's like one of the subtleties of these old Indian languages. Tradition tells us that she was the daughter of Mahanamasaka by a slave girl named Nagamundar, and that she afterwards became the consort of the king of Kosala. She conceived a son by the king, but the king, coming to know of her servile origin, degraded her from her rank, and also degraded her son Vidudaba. See, this has a short A at the end, so it's a male. Mother and son never came outside the palace. Hearing of this, the master at early dawn came to the palace, attended by 500 brethren, and, sitting down on the seat prepared for him, said, "Sire, where is Vasabhakatiya?" Then the king told him what had happened. "Sire, whose daughter is Vasabhakatiya?" "Mahanama's daughter, sir." "When she came away, to whom did she come as wife?" "To me, sir." "Sire, she is a king's daughter. To a king she is wed, and to a king she bore her son. Wherefore is that son not in authority over the realm which owns its father's sway? In bygone days, a monarch who had a son by a casual stick-gatherer gave that son his sovereignty. The king asked the Blessed One to explain this. The Blessed One made clear what had been concealed from him by rebirth. Interesting is how these very sort of almost subtle turns of what's it called? Turns of text, like that they say that, like there seems to be quite formulaic. That so they introduce a story or sort of like a quandary or a problem of understanding who's who and what's going on, and then it will explain, like in quite a formulaic fashion, the Buddha made clear what had been concealed by rebirth. So it's admitting each time that the problem these people have is the fact that their understanding of their relationship with someone and the implications of it and the profundity of it is concealed of them by the fact that they do not see their past rebirths, which a fully enlightened Buddha does. So Buddha doesn't have this problem. So it's a very different way of looking at the teachings, isn't it? Very traditional. So here begins the story. Once on a time in Benares, Brahmadatta the king, having gone in great state to his pleasaunce, was roaming about looking for fruits and flowers when he came on a woman who was merrily singing away as she picked up sticks in the grove. Falling in love at first sight, the king became intimate with her, and the Bodhisattva was conceived then and there. Feeling as heavy within as though weighed down with the bolt of Indra, that's the Vajra, the woman knew that she would become a mother and told the king so. He gave her the signet ring from his finger and dismissed her with these words, "If it be a girl, spend this ring on her nurture, but if it be a boy, bring ring and child to me." When the woman's time was come, she bore the Bodhisattva, and when he could run about and was playing in the playground, a cry would arise, "No father has hit me." Hearing this, the Bodhisattva ran away to his mother and asked who his father was. "You are the son of the king of Benares, my boy." "What proof of this is there, mother?" "My son, the king on leaving me gave me the signet ring and said, 'If it be a girl, spend this ring on her nurture, but if it be a boy, bring ring and child to me.' Why then you don't take me to my father, mother? Why then don't you take me to my father, mother?" Seeing that the boy's mind was made up, she took him to the gate of the palace and bade their coming be announced to the king. Being summoned in, she entered and bowing before his majesty said, "This is your son, sire." The king knew well enough that this was the truth, but shame before all his court made him reply, "He is no son of mine." "But here is your signet ring, sire. You will recognize that." "Nor is this my signet ring." Then said the woman, "Sire, I have now no witness to prove my words, except the appeal to truth. Wherefore, if you be the father of my child, I pray that he may stay in mid-air. But if not, may he fall to the earth and be killed." So saying, she seized the Bodhisattva by the foot and threw him up into the air. Seated cross-legged in mid-air, the Bodhisattva in sweet tones repeated this stanza to his father, declaring the truth. "Your son am I, great monarch. Rear me, sire. The king rears others, but much more his child." Hearing the Bodhisattva thus teach the truth from the mid-air, the king stretched out his hands and cried, "Come to me, my boy. None but me shall rear and nurture you." 1,000 hands were stretched out to receive the Bodhisattva, but it was into the arms of the king and no other that he descended, seating himself in the king's lap. The king made him viceroy and made his mother queen consort. At the death of his king the father, he came to the throne by the title of King Katavahana, the stick bearer, and after ruling his realm righteously, passed away to fare according to his deserts. That ends the lesson. His lesson to the king of Kosala ended, and his 2 stories told. The master made the connection linking them both together and identified their birth by saying, Mahamaya was the mother of those days, King Shuddhodana was the father, and I myself King Katavahana. So that's his Shakyamuni Buddha here is saying that he was the little prince that was thrown in the air, and his mother was and father were his parents as well in those days. Very interesting. Number 8. Garmini Jataka. This one doesn't have a explanation. It's a very short one. Okay. Number 8. Garmini Jataka. Their heart's desire. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana about a brother who gave up persevering. In this Jataka, both the introductory story and the story of the past will be given in the 11th book in connection with the Samvara Jataka, number 462. Was that the one mentioned before? No. The incidents are the same, both for that Jataka and for this, but the stanzas are different. Abiding steadfast in the counsels of the Bodhisattva, Prince Garmini, finding himself, though the youngest of 100 brothers, surrounded by those 100 brothers as a retinue and seated beneath the white canopy of kingship, contemplated his glory and thought, all this glory I owe to my teacher. And in his joy, he burst into this heartfelt utterance. Their heart's desire they reap who hurry not. No Garmini, ripe excellence is thine. 7 or 8 days after he had become king, all his brothers departed to their own homes. King Garmini, after ruling his kingdom in righteousness, passed away to fare according to his deserts. The Bodhisattva also passed away to fare according to his deserts. His lesson ended, the master preached the truths, at the close whereof the faint-hearted brother won arahatship. Having told the 2 stories, the master showed the connection linking them both together and identified the birth. So that's quite an obscure one. We'll move to number 9, the Mahadeva Jataka. A king, finding grey hair in his head, renounces his throne to prepare for as a hermit for death. Sounds like an interesting one. Number 9, Mahadeva Jataka. Lo, these great grey hairs. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana about the great renunciation, which has already been related in the Nidana Katha. On this occasion the brethren sat praising the renunciation of the Lord of Wisdom. Entering the hall of truth and seating himself on the Buddha seat, the master thus addressed the brethren. What is your theme, brethren, as you sit here in conclave? It is naught else, sir, than the praise of your own renunciation. Brethren, rejoined the master, not only in these latter days has the Tathagata made a renunciation. In bygone days too he similarly renounced the world. The brethren asked the Blessed One for an explanation of this. The Blessed One made clear what had been concealed from them by rebirth. So as I mentioned before, there are many words for Buddha, or many sort of synonyms for the word Buddha. There's as many as 80 listed in one of the old dictionaries. The main 3 used here are master. I'm not sure what that's translating, possibly acharya. And then there's Tathagata, which is difficult, which is Sanskrit and Pali, same in both languages, but difficult to translate. One who goes to thusness or something like that. Or actually, one who comes and goes in the same manner as all the previous Buddhas and all the future Buddhas. So very difficult to translate, so best to keep it in its original. And then there's Blessed One or Fortunate One, which translates Bhagavan, which sometimes is left untranslated. So we begin the lesson. Once on a time in Mithila, in the realm of Videha, there was a king named Makadeva, who was righteous and ruled righteously. For successive periods of 84,000 years, he had respectively assumed himself as a prince, ruled as viceroy, and reigned as king. All these long years had he lived, when one day he said to his barber, "Tell me, friend barber, when you see any grey hairs in my head." So one day, years and years after, the barber did find among the raven locks of the king on it. So one day, years and years after, the barber did find among the raven locks of the king a single grey hair, and he told the king so. "Pull it out, my friend," said the king, "and lay it on my palm." The barber accordingly plucked the hair out with his golden tongs and laid it in the king's hand. The king had at that time still 84,000 years more to live. We see this a lot in the old texts, by the way. These fantastic numbers of ways happening that seem unbelievable to us. Anyway, the king had at that time still 84,000 years more to live, but nevertheless at the sight of that one grey hair he was filled with deep emotion. He seemed to see the king of death standing over him. That's probably referring to Yama, or to be cooped within a blazing hut of leaves. Foolish Makadeva, he cried. Grey hairs have come upon you before you have been able to rid yourself of depravities. He's giving himself a hard time. And as he thought and thought about the appearance of his grey hair, he grew aflame within. The sweat rolled down from his body, whilst his raiment oppressed him and seemed intolerable. This very day, thought he, will I renounce the world for the brother's life. To his barber he gave the grant of a village, which yielded 100,000 pieces of money. He sent for his eldest son and said to him, "My son, grey hairs are come upon me, and I am become old. I have had my fill of human joys, and fain would taste the joys divine. The time for my renunciation has come. Take the sovereignty upon yourself. As for me, I will take up my abode in the pleasance called Makadeva's mango grove, and there tread the ascetic's path." As he was thus bent on leading the brother's life, his ministers drew near and said, "What is the reason, sire, why you adopt the brother's life?" Taking the grey hair in his hand, the king repeated this stanza to his ministers. "Lo, these grey hairs that on my head appear are death-sown messengers that come to rob my life. 'Tis time I turned from worldly things, and in the hermit's path sought saving peace." And after these words he renounced his sovereignty that self-same day and became a recluse. Dwelling in that very mango grove of Makadeva, he there during 84,000 years fostered the four perfect states within himself. To me that looks like he's talking about the four immeasurables. I'm not 100% sure. And, dying with insight full and unbroken, was reborn in the realm of Brahma. Passing thence, he became a king again in Mithila, under the name of Nimi, and after uniting his scattered family, once more became a hermit in that same mango grove, winning the four perfect states and passing thence once more to the realm of Brahma. That's the end of the lesson. After repeating his statement that he had similarly renounced the world in bygone days, the master at the end of his lesson preached the four truths. Some entered the first path, some the second, and some the third. Having told the two stories, the master showed the connection between them and identified their birth by saying, "In those days Ananda was the barber, Rahula the son, and I myself King Makadeva." So Ananda was the barber who became his attendant, Rahula the son who became his son in his his life as Shakyamuni. Okay, let's see what story 10 is about. Sukha Vihari Jataka. A king who becomes a brother proclaims the happiness he has found. That sounds like a good one. The man who guards not. This story was told by the master while in the Anupiya mango grove near the town of Anupiya, about the elder Bhadia the happy, who joined the brotherhood in the company of the 6 young nobles with whom was Upali. Of these, the elders Bhadia, Kimbila, Bhagu and Upali attained to arhatship. The elder Ananda entered the first path. The elder Anuruddha gained all-seeing vision, and Devadatta obtained the power of ecstatic self-abstraction. The story of the 6 young nobles up to the events at Anupiya will be related in the Kandakala Jataka, number 534. The Venerable Bhadia, who used in the days of his royalty to guard himself as though he were appointed his own tutelary deity, bethought him of the state of fear in which he then lived, when he was being guarded by numerous guards, and when he used to toss about even on his royal couch in his private apartments high up in the palace. And with this he compared the absence of fear in which, now that he was an arhat, he roamed hither and thither in the forests and deserted places. And at the thought he burst into this heartfelt utterance, "Oh, happiness! Oh, happiness!" This the brethren reported to the Blessed One, saying, The Venerable Bhadia is declaring that the bliss he has won." "Brethren," said the Blessed One, "this is not the first time that Bhadia's life has been happy. His life was no less happy in bygone days." The brethren asked the Blessed One to explain this. The Blessed One made clear what had been concealed from them by rebirth. So the lesson begins. Once upon a time, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born a wealthy northern Brahmin. Realizing the evil of lusts and the blessings that flow from renouncing the world, he abjured lusts and, retiring to the Himalayas, there became a hermit and won the 8 endowments. I can't think of what the 8 endowments could be offhand. His following waxed great, amounting to 500 ascetics. Once when the rain set in, he quitted the Himalayas, and travelling along on an alms pilgrimage with his attendant ascetics through village and town, came at last to Benares, where he took up his abode in the royal pleasaunce as the pensioner of the king's bounty. After dwelling here for the 4 rainy months, he came to the king and to take his leave. But the king said to him, "You are old, reverend sir. Wherefore should you go back to the Himalayas? Send your pupils back thither and stop here yourself." The Bodhisattva entrusted his 500 ascetics to the care of his oldest disciple, saying, "Go you with these to the Himalayas, I will stop on here." Now that oldest disciple had once been a king, but had given up a mighty kingdom to become a brother. By the due performance of the rites appertaining to concentrated thoughts, he had mastered the 8 endowments. As he dwelt with the ascetics in the Himalayas, one day a longing came upon him to see the master, and he said to his fellows, "Live on contentedly here. I will come back as soon as I have paid my respects to the master." So away he went to the master, paid his respects to him, and greeted him lovingly. Then he laid by the side of his master on a mat which he had spread there. At this point appeared the king, who had come to the pleasaunce to see the ascetic, and with a salutation he took his seat on one side. But though he was aware of the king's presence, that oldest disciple forbore to rise, but still lay there, crying with passionate earnestness, "Oh happiness, oh happiness!" Displeased that the ascetic, though he had seen him and had not risen, the king said to the Bodhisattva, "Reverend sir, this ascetic must have had his fill to eat, seeing that he continues to lie there so happily, exclaiming with such earnestness." "Sire," said the Bodhisattva, "of old this ascetic was a king as you are. He is speaking of how in the old days, when he was a layman and lived in regal pomp with his many men at arms to guard him, he never knew such happiness as now is his. It is the happiness of the brother's life and the happiness that insight brings which move him to this heartfelt utterance." And the Bodhisattva further repeated this statement to teach the king the truth. "The man who guards not, nor is guarded, sire, lives happily, free from slavery to lusts." Appeased by the lesson that thus taught him, the king made his salutation and returned to his palace. The disciple also took leave of his master and returned to the Himalayas. But the Bodhisattva continued to dwell on there, and dying with insight full and unbroken, was reborn in the realm of Brahma. His lesson ended, and the two stories told, the master showed the connection linking them both together, and identified the birth by saying, "The elder Bhadia was the disciple of those days, and I myself the master of the company of ascetics." That's number 10. Looks like we're reading about 20 pages a week on this, which is good. So number 11 is called the Lakkhana Jataka, which is a story about two stags. One through stupidity loses all his following, whilst the other brings his herd home in safety. The Upright Man. This story was told by the master in the bamboo grove near Rajagaha about Devadatta. The story of Devadatta will be related up to the date of the Abhimara employment in the Kandhala Jataka, up to the date of his dismissal from the office of treasurer in the Chula Hamsa Jataka, and up to the date of his being swallowed up by the earth in the 16th book of the Samudra Varnija Jataka. For, on the occasion now in question, Devadatta, through failing to carry the 5 points on which he had pressed for, had made a schism in the brotherhood and had gone off with 500 brethren to dwell in Gaya Sisa. Now these brethren came to a riper knowledge, and the master, knowing this, called the two chief disciples, Sariputra and Moggallana, and said, "Sariputta," this is the Pali version of Shariputra, "your 500 pupils who were perverted by Devadatta's teaching and went off with him have now come to a riper knowledge. Go thither with a number of brethren, preach the truth to them, enlighten these wanderers respecting the paths and fruits, and bring them back with you." They went thither, preached the truth, enlightened them respecting the paths and the fruits, and next day at dawn came back again with those brethren to the mango grove. And whilst Sariputta was standing there, after saluting the Blessed One on his return, the brethren spoke thus him in praise of the elder Sariputta: "Sir, very bright was the glory of our elder brother, the captain of the truth, as he returned with a following of 500 brethren, whereas Devadatta has lost all of his following. This is not the only time, brethren, when glory has been Sariputta's on his return with a following of his kinsfolk, like glory was his too in bygone days. So too this is not the only time when Devadatta has lost his following. He lost it also in bygone days." The brethren asked the Blessed One to explain this to them. The Blessed One made clear what had been concealed by rebirth. So begins the lesson. Once upon a time, in the city of Rajagaha in Sanskrit, where he taught the Heart Sutra, In the kingdom of Magadha, there ruled a certain king of Magadha, in whose days the Bodhisattva came to life as a stag. Growing up, he dwelt in the forest as the leader of a herd of 1,000 deer. He had 2 young ones, named Lucky and Blacky. When he grew old, he handed his charge over to his 2 sons, placing 500 deer under the care of each of them. And so now these 2 young stags were in charge of the herd. Towards harvest time in Magadha, when the crops stand thick in the fields, it is dangerous for the deer in the forests round. Anxious to kill the creatures that devour their crops, the peasants dig pitfalls, fix stakes, set stone traps, and plant snares and other gins, so that many deer are slain. Accordingly, when the Bodhisattva marked it that it was crop time, he sent for his 2 sons and said to them, "My children, it is now the time when crops stand thick in the fields, and many deer meet their death at this season. We who are old will make shift to stay in one spot, but you will retire each with your herd to the mountainous tracts in the forest, and come back when the crops have been carried." "Very good," said his 2 sons, and departed with their herds as their father bade. Now the men who live along the route know quite well at the times at which deer take to the hills and return thence. And lying in wait in hiding places here and there along the route, they shoot and kill numbers of them. The dullard Blacky, ignorant of the times to travel and the times to halt, kept his deer on the march early and late, both at dawns and in the gloaming, approaching the very confines of the villages. And the peasants, in ambush or in the open, destroyed numbers of his herd. Having thus by his crass folly worked the destruction of all these, it was with a very few survivors that he reached the forest. Lucky, on the other hand, being wise and astute and full of resource, never so much as approached the confines of a village. He did not travel by day or even in the dawn or gloaming. I think gloaming means evening or something. Only in the dead of the night did he move, and the result was that he reached the forest without losing a single head of his deer. 4 months they stayed in the forest, not leaving the hills till the crops were carried. On the homeward way, Blacky, by repeating his former folly, lost the rest of his herd, and returned solitary and alone, whereas Lucky had not lost one of his herd, but had brought back the whole 500 deer when he appeared before his parents. As he saw his 2 sons returning, the Bodhisattva framed this stanza in concert with the herd of deer. "The upright kindly man hath his reward. Mark Lucky leading back his troop of kin, while here comes Blacky shorn of all his herd." Such was the Bodhisattva's welcome to his son, and after living to a good old age, he passed away to fare according to his deserts. At the close of his lesson, when the master had repeated that Sariputta's glory and Devadatta's loss had both had a parallel in bygone days, he showed the connection linking the stories together and identified the birth by saying, "Devadatta was Blacky of those days, his followers were Blacky's following, Sariputta was the Lucky of those days, and his following the Buddha's followers. Rahula's mother was the mother of those days, and I myself was the father." Rahula's mother being Yashodhara, the Buddha's main wife. So that's 11. So we'll finish just with the, we'll wind up here. We'll finish with the introduction to the story of number 12, which is called Nigrodha Miga Jataka. This is a lengthy one. Deer in a royal park, to avoid being hunted, decide that lots shall be cast to select a daily victim. The lot having fallen on a doe, big with young, the king of the deer offers himself as a substitute at the block, and saves not only his own life, but also the lives of all living creatures. Keep only with the banyan deer. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana about the mother of the elder named Prince Kassapa. The daughter, we learn, of a wealthy merchant of Rajagaha was deeply rooted in goodness and scorned all temporal things. She had reached her final existence, and within her breast, like a lamp in a pitcher, glowed her sure hope of winning arhatship. As soon as she reached knowledge of herself, she took no joy in a worldly life, but yearned to renounce the world. With this aim, she said to her mother and father, "My dear parents, my heart takes no joy in a worldly life. Fain would I embrace the saving doctrines of the Buddha." Fain is an old archaic word meaning rather. "Suffer me to take the vows." "What, my dear? Ours is a very wealthy family, and you are our only daughter. You cannot take the vows." Having failed to win her parents' consent, though she asked them again and again, she thought to herself, "Be it so then, when I am married into another family, I will gain my husband's consent and take the vows." And when, being grown up, she entered another family, she proved a devoted wife and lived a life of goodness and virtue in her new home. Now it came to pass that she was conceived, though she knew it not. Now it came to pass that she conceived, though she knew it not. There was a festival proclaimed in that city, and everybody kept holiday, the whole city being decked like a city of the gods. But she, even at the height of the festival, neither anointed herself nor put on any finery, going about in her everyday attire. So her husband said to her, "My dear wife, everybody is holiday making, but you do not put on your bravery." "My lord and master," she replied, "the body is filled with 32 component parts." This is talking about the 32 impurities, I think. Wherefore should it be adorned? This bodily frame is not of angelic or archangelic mould. It is not made of gold, jewels, or yellow sandalwood. It takes not its birth from the womb of lotus flowers, white or red or blue. It is not filled with any immortal balsam. Nay, it is bred of corruption and born of mortal parents. The qualities that mark it are the wearing and wasting away, the decay and destruction of the merely transient. It is fated to swell a graveyard, and it is devoted to lusts. I like that. It is fated to swell a graveyard, and is devoted to lusts. It is the source of sorrow, the occasion of lamentation. It is the abode of all diseases, and the repository of the workings of karma. Foul within, it is always excreting. Yea, as all the world can see, its end is death, passing to the charnel house, there to be the dwelling place of all of worms. What should I achieve, my bridegroom, what should I achieve, my bridegroom, by tricking out this body? Would not its adornment be like decorating the outside of a closed stool? "My dear wife," rejoined the young merchant, "if you regard this body as so sinful, why don't you become a sister?" meaning become a nun. "If I am accepted, my husband, I will take the vows this very day." "Very good," said he. "I will get you admitted to the order," the Sangha. And after he had shown lavish beauty and hospitality to the order, he escorted her with a large following to the nunnery and had her admitted as a sister, but of the following of Devadatta. Devadatta being Buddha's evil cousin. Great was her joy at the fulfillment of her desire to become a sister. As her time grew near, the sisters, noticing the change in her person, the swelling in her hands and feet, and her increased size, said, "Lady, you seem able to become a mother. What does it mean?" "I cannot tell, ladies. I only know I have led a virtuous life." So the sisters brought her before Devadatta, saying, "Lord, this young gentlewoman, who was admitted a sister with the reluctant consent of her husband, has now proved to be with child. But whether this dates from before her admission to the order or not, we cannot say. What are we to do now?" Not being a Buddha, and not having any charity, love or pity, Devadatta thought thus: "It will be a damaging report to get abroad that one of my sisters was with child, and that I condone the offence. My course is clear. I must expel this woman from the order." Without any inquiries, starting forward as if to thrust aside a mass of stone, he said, "Away," and expelled this woman. Receiving this answer, they arose with reverent salutation and with reverent salutation withdrew to their own nunnery. But the girls said to those sisters, "Ladies, Devadatta the elder is not the Buddha. My vows were taken not under Devadatta, but under the Buddha, the foremost of the world. Rob me not of the vocation I won so hardly, but take me before the master at Jetavana." So they set out with her for Jetavana, and journeying over the 45 leagues thither from Rajagaha, came in due course to their destination, where with reverent salutation to the master they laid the matter before him. Thought the master, albeit the child was conceived when she was still of the laity, yet it will give the heretics on occasion to say that the ascetic Gautama has taken a sister expelled by Devadatta. Therefore, to cut short such talk, this case must be heard in the presence of the king and his court. So on the morrow meaning the next day, old-fashioned language again, he sent for Pasenadi, the king of Kosala, the elder and the younger Anatapindikas, the lady Visakha, see it's got a long vowel at the end again, the great lay disciple, and other well-known personages. And in the evening, when the 4 classes of the faithful were all assembled, brothers, sisters, and lay disciples, both male and female, he said to the elder Upali, "Go and clear up the matter of the young sister in the presence of the 4 classes of my disciples." We're almost there. We're on the last page. "It shall be done, reverend sir," said the elder, and forth to the assembly he went. And there, seating himself in his place, he called up Visakha, the lay disciple, in the sight of the king, and placed the conduct of the inquiry in her hands, saying, "First ascertain the precise day of the precise month on which this girl joined the order, Visakha, and thence compute whether she conceived before or since that date." Accordingly, the lady had a curtain put up as a screen, behind which she retired with the girl. It has some Latin names, which usually means something difficult to translate. The lady found, on comparing the days and months, that the conception had taken place before the girl had become a sister. This she reported to the elder, who proclaimed the sister innocent before all the assembly. And she, now that her innocence was established, reverently saluted the order and the master, and with the sisters returned to her own nunnery. When her time was come, she bore the son strong in spirit, for whom she had prayed at the feet of the Buddha Padumuttara ages ago. One day when the king was passing by the nunnery, he heard the cry of an infant, and asked his courtiers what it meant. They, knowing the facts, told his majesty that the cry came from the girl to which the young sister had given birth. "Sirs," said the king, "the care of children is a clog on the sisters in their religious life. Let us take charge of him." So the infant was handed over by the king's command to the ladies of his family, and brought up as a prince. When the day came for him to be named, he was called Kassapa, but was known as Prince Kassapa because he was brought up like a prince. At the age of 7, he was admitted as a novice under the master, and a full brother when he was old enough. As time went on, he waxed famous among the expounders of the truth. So the master gave him precedence, saying, "Brethren, the first in eloquence among my disciples is Prince Kassapa." Afterwards, by virtue of the Vamika Sutta, he won arhatship. So to his mother, the sister grew to clear vision and won the supreme fruit. Prince Kassapa the elder shone in the faith of the Buddha, even as the full moon in the mid-heaven. Now one day in the afternoon, when the Tathagata, on return from his alms round, had addressed the brethren, he passed into his perfumed chamber. At the close of his address, the brethren spent the daytime either in their night quarters or in their day quarters, till it was evening, when they assembled in the hall and spoke as follows. "Brethren, Devadatta, because he was not a Buddha and because he had no charity, love or pity, was nigh being the ruin of the elder Prince Kassapa and his reverend mother. But the all-enlightened Buddha, being the Lord of truth and being perfect in charity, love and pity, has proved their salvation." And as they sat there telling the praises of the Buddha, he entered the hall with all the grace of a Buddha and asked, as he took his seat, what they were talking of as they sat together. "Of your own virtues, sir," said they, and told him all. "This is not the first time, brethren," said he, "that the Tathagata has proved the salvation and refuge of these two. He was the same to them in the past also." Then on the brethren asking him to explain this to them, he revealed what rebirth had hidden from them. So we'll leave that story for next time. It's a over 3 pages story, so it's a good place to stop this week. So thank you all for joining me in these long meditations on the past lives of the Buddha. I'm sure it's very beneficial, of great merit for us to patiently go through the old-fashioned language of the translation, which, mind you, is easier than learning Pali, I'm sure. And good to sit together like this and remind ourselves of the Buddha's, not just yes, we could say the Buddha's actual conviction in rebirth, in the sense that he himself remembered his past lives, unlike us. So, yeah, on that note, we've got 2 more lessons after this, and so we'll just do the dedication of merit here. By this merit may we overcome the defilements and gain omniscience. May I liberate all beings from the ocean of birth, all age, sickness, death, healing the Mahayana teachings. Whatever merit I have accrued, may all beings become stainless vessels to hold the Mahayana teachings. Courageous Manjushri knew all things, and Samantabhadra did likewise, following all of their examples. I shall dedicate all these merits. May the excellent Bodhicitta take birth where it has not yet done so. Where it has been born, may it increase freely without degeneration. So thank you all for your company. See you next week for more Jatakamala.